many stories of when, for example, many of the South American tribes are entering into this other world, so to speak, that they have contact with other forms of entities that actually hands down information to them, something about what is happening on Earth or their own health in some cases. There's so many stories about this.
Indeed.
Do you think that
and
could be...
in fact, there is textual evidence for that.
Sure.
There are about, I think, 3 or 4 of the Nag Hammadi texts that present themselves as what we would today call documents of channeling,
mm-hmm.
you know?
Sure.
Channeling. And in those texts, we have a report, as it were, a kind of shorthand report. It's not, the reports are kind of, like notes taken in a classroom, you know? And the report seems to indicate that there is a master or a seer or shaman who is standing in front of the group of students and is communicating with a higher dimensional being and channeling information from that being. And there are texts which actually show that, one of which is called the Discourse on the 8th and the 9th. The Discourse on the 8th and the 9th is a Nag Hammadi text that actually describes that kind of channeling session. And so you're absolutely right. Some of the information that Gnostics received came from contacting higher intelligences, and it's clear from the text that they discerned and detected many different kinds of non-human entities in the cosmos. And not all of them were hostile to humanity. In fact, many of them were allies.
Right.
But they did detect one predatory species, the Archons. And one is all it takes, man.
Sure,
one
that's right.
is all it takes.
Yeah.
It's like malaria. It only takes one mosquito, an Anopheles mosquito, to bite you, to give you malaria.
Sure.
There are many mosquitoes in the world, many kinds of instincts, but it only takes one. And so they seem to have been terribly concerned that there was one predatory species, the Archons, that we really need to watch out for.
And it even might be very difficult going into this other place and discern who's who, so to speak, who's hostile, who's not, who's deceiving, who's giving me right information here. That must always be a concern, right?
Well, you know, it's very interesting. There was a book that came out in 1980 called The Way of the Shaman by Michael Harner. And this was a key book in bringing shamanism into the mainstream. And Michael Harner was a psychiatrist from Connecticut or somewhere in the East Coast who went to South America and, did ayahuasca. And under the ayahuasca trance, he had a vision and so forth, and he saw various things. And of course, the session of ayahuasca he did was controlled or managed by some of the veteran ayahuasca shamans who were in that region.
Right.
And Michael Harner relates this amazing incident of how he came out of his ayahuasca vision and he turned to the old Brazilian shaman there to tell him what he'd experienced, you know. And he said, I met these dragon-like beings and they had wings and they said that they came to the earth in a boat and they brought the seeds of humanity here in this boat, in this big canoe and so forth and so on. And isn't that fascinating? Now I know how humanity originated. And the old Brazilian shaman looked at him and laughed.
Yeah.
And he said, well, they always tell everybody that. They're just a bunch of liars, you know. And so the interesting thing is that if you're going to practice shamanism and you're going to go into altered states of consciousness, you must learn how to distinguish how to see what the tricksters are doing, because there are many tricksters out there.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And it's part of the practice of knowing the true from the false.
Yeah.
Just like in any other field of life, you know.
Of course.
So I believe that the Gnostics were highly accomplished shamans who could detect the difference and that they pinpointed these archons as a particular menace to us.
Absolutely fascinating. Now let's dive into a little bit about. I guess I want to start at 1947 and move on from there. I want to talk about Roswell or Roswell. I want to talk about Roswell, exactly, the discovery.
Roswell, New Mexico, right?
Yeah, and the discovery of the Nag Hammadi library in the similar time period. We could talk about the OSS becoming the CIA. You know how
that's right.
transpired. There's so much there. Where do you want to begin?
Well, I think there's a piece on that on the site, of course, 1947 Nexus. I think that it's fascinating. We could talk about that for the rest of the night. Just point out the essential facts. I'll just point this out for those of your listeners who don't know. The Nag Hammadi texts were discovered actually by an Arab peasant in December 1945, but their importance was not recognized. They were just stuffed in a drawer in a museum in Cairo. And it was not until June 1947 when another scholar came from France, Jean Dorès came from France, and that he was shown these and he realized how important they were. Now, June, July, August of 1947 was a time when simultaneously a number of other events occurred. That was also the year that the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. And so, and the Dead Sea Scrolls are another kind of document. They were discovered near Jerusalem, and they were written in Hebrew and Aramaic. But they form an important part of this story. The Dead Sea Scrolls are discovered. The CIA was founded from the OSS, and a whole number of other things occurred in 1947. It was sort of like an explosion of the human psyche. And we're kind of living in the effects of that explosion now. And the main effect of that is that these esoteric religious documents, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi documents, are somehow all mixed up with our ideas of global conspiracy and our ideas of extraterrestrial, extraterrestrial influence.
Sure.
Yeah, it's just remarkable.
Yeah.
Just a little over 60 years ago, that it all seemed to explode at the same moment.
It did. You already, I should say, have kind of laid out the idea that the Archons possibly could either be the Greys or have some kind of a relationship to them, and I want to explore that further, and I want to explore the idea of alien technology further and what is happening with us now. I guess the first thing I would like to ask you is, do you think that possibly then there was a downed craft, so to speak, a craft that crashed in Roswell around 47,
right.
and a consequence of that was that we attained some kind of alien technology?
Right. The Roswell crash, which took place also in that year, is significant because the Roswell crash is the basis of what is called the extraterrestrial hypothesis. If you look on Metahistory.org, you'll find in the site guide there's an article called 9 Theories of Extraterrestrial Influence. There are 9, and I outline 9 different theories. One of those theories is the Gnostic theory, which I've been discussing with you. But the most well-known one, of course, is the so-called extraterrestrial hypothesis. And according to this hypothesis, an alien spacecraft crashed in Roswell in 1947, and bodies were recovered, living bodies. And what happened is that the American government secretly cut a deal with these gray aliens and got from them technology, secrets of technology, in return for allowing them to experiment on the human race, to abduct people, to interbreed, and so forth and so on. Okay? That's the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which is the most widely accepted conspiracy theory. Now, you're asking me, do I think that that crash actually took place? Well, I want to say this, that in the Gnostic materials that I've studied, there are descriptions of close encounters, of abductions, vivid descriptions. And there are also descriptions of the gray-type aliens and a reptilian-type alien.
Really?
Those are in the text. But I must add that there are no descriptions of hardware. There are no descriptions of flying saucers in the Gnostic material. So I tend to be very, very cautious when I hear claims that there's actually hardware that has, crashed and so forth. There are descriptions of hardware and flying saucers in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So these sightings have occurred from very ancient times. So my answer would be, I really don't know. I tend to think that the Roswell story may have been largely invented, and that it may be being used to manipulate people. It's a very complex subject, but
sure.
you know, I kind of follow Jacques Vallée on this. Jacques Vallée, who wrote Messengers of Deception. He was, in my opinion, the most intelligent and careful analyst of the UFO phenomena. And he says whether or not alien spacecraft have actually crashed, the story about them controls people's minds and manipulates people. And I sort of take that view.
Well,
sorry if it sounds like I'm weaseling out of the question.
No. That's a perfect one, because I also want to kind of go into that area a little bit. Because earlier you said that these archons are kind of not physical, so to speak. This is something otherworldly that can't occupy bodies. But what I kind of want to lead into here a little bit is the fact that they actually are interested in inhabiting bodies on this planet, meaning that they want to in some way either incarnate into bodies or actually build something either from genetic material or from mechanic, robotics basically, that they can incarnate into. One idea that has been laid forth is the idea that the Greys actually are robots. If we think of the idea of how we do things now.
That's right.
Meaning that we send probes, we send robots into space to explore other planets.
That's right.
So why could not the Greys be a more, artificial intelligence, almost kind of a entity in itself, coming here exploring on behalf on some other intelligence from another solar system,
Okay. Now, there are, of course, thousands and thousands of theories about this, and there's a lot of confusion about it. Let me see if I can give you, as briefly as possible, a Gnostic approach that may be helpful.
Sure.
What I draw from what the Gnostics said about the archons are two important points. The first point is that they are an inorganic species, probably silicon, mercury kind of base, and that they live in the solar system at large, but they cannot live in the biosphere of the Earth. So for them to come into the biosphere of the Earth is more or less like a human being diving into the bottom of the ocean. We need to have very complicated diving gear. We need to either go in a diving bell, or we have to have some kind of bulky diving equipment. But we cannot stay down at the bottom of the ocean very long because we're not designed to live there. So this explains why the actual physical appearances of these aliens would be so erratic and so brief, because they're only able to make brief forays into our atmosphere. Okay? That's one explanation. The second point is even more important. You raised the question, well, do they want to incarnate? Do they want to somehow become embodied on Earth and take over the Earth? Well, from what I draw from the Gnostic writings, this is not their aim. Their aim is more or less to invade our minds and to live through us. Now, if they succeed in doing that, then we would become archontic. I use that adjective, archontic.
Sure.
What does it mean to become archontic? If the human race were to become archontic, we would show a change of behavior that would be dramatic. First of all, we would only live in simulated or artificial environments. We would sever all connections with the natural world. Second, if the human race were to become archontic, we would make ourselves into robots. We would become robotized in our behavior. We would become like robot zombies, and we would attempt to do everything to replace our natural organs with prosthetic organs. We would, for instance, if we had a perfectly natural legs, we would prefer to replace those legs with robotic legs.
Bionic, yeah.
Bionic. We would become bionic. We would go into a bionic phase. That is how we would behave